Have you ever considered what it truly means to hold power over another being? Is the power to dominate truly a privilege, or is it a burden that will one day weigh heavy upon the soul? Ancient sage Saadi tells a story that reflects on the frailty of power, the value of compassion, and the precarious balance of justice that awaits us all. A wealthy man stood by his courtyard, and his figure cast a long shadow over a trembling slave. The man's hands were steady as he raised a whip. He had bound the limbs of his slave to prevent escape, leaving no path for mercy to intervene. The rich man believed he was within his rights. Had he not purchased the slave? Had not his wealth afforded him the claim over another life? Power had planted itself in his chest, and it made him deaf to the soft cries, blind to the despair that hung in the air like thick mist. As this scene unfolded, a pious man whose heart remained tethered to the teachings of compassion happened to pass by. He watched for a moment, his heart heavy with the knowledge that all life belonged not to men, but to something greater, an ultimate owner, and in that instant he saw that the wealthy man's belief in ownership was deluded, a reflection of his power on earth, but not an eternal truth. The pious man approached and spoke words meant to pierce through the hardened layers of the rich man's heart. He reminded him that the bond between man and slave was not one of ownership. It was a test. The rich man's fortune, his power, all these things were gifts bestowed upon him for the short span of earthly life. But with every gift comes a test of gratitude, and this was one that he was failing. He continued, saying that true ownership belonged only to God, that to mistake earthly power for eternal control was to invite the wrath of a justice far beyond human comprehension. Today, he stood over the slave with power and dominance. But what would happen when the true master called upon both of them on the day of judgment? He explained that there would come a time when justice would unfold in its most unyielding form. On that day, the slave's cries would find their voice in divine testimony, and perhaps it would be the wealthy man who would find himself bound, but with the chains of his own deeds. There was a silence after these words, a silence that threatened to crack the illusion of power in which the rich man had encased himself. It was a sobering silence, one in which the rich man's heart could hear the faint echo of regret, a regret that spoke of lost opportunities to show mercy and to be human. The pious man walked away, leaving behind not just words, but a weight that hung heavy on the wealthy man's chest. The courtyard seemed to grow smaller, the cries of his slave louder in his ears. The power that had once filled his heart now felt brittle, fragile, and the wealthy man began to understand, truly understand, that the world was not as he had once believed. And so, the story unfolds to its quiet, thoughtful end. The wealthy man stood by his bound slave, suddenly feeling the threads of humanity tying him to this other person. He loosened the bonds. For the first time, he saw the person before him, not a possession, but a life as fragile, as precious as his own. In the end, as Saadi's story reveals, power is a fleeting thing that, when misused, will shatter the soul. Upon the scales of divine justice, the cries of the oppressed are never lost. They linger, waiting for the day when truth and consequence converge. So, dear listener, if dominance or power is ever granted to you, do not awaken cruelty within. Instead, remember the fragility of what we hold and the inevitable day when what is done in the shadow will be brought into the light. And when that day comes, will you find yourself among the flowers, or will the fire be your only companion? The rich man had believed himself to be the master, but by the end he realized, in a moment both profound and simple, that true mastery lies in kindness, in the way we treat others when we have the power to do otherwise. And just like that, his final action served as a response to the first. Power is never the end, it is only the beginning of the choices that make us who we are.